Hi and welcome to Photoshop Basics. I'm your instructor Dan Hood, and this is lesson 3 about files. And this particular lesson is about how to save your image files, your Photoshop documents, in different formats. So Photoshop can save files in about 25 different formats. To go through and talk about all of the different formats really is kind of a waste of time, because really in real world use of Photoshop, there's probably only about 5 different formats that are widely used and are standard in either photography or web or graphic design. So we will concentrate on the top 5 file formats that are used. So the first format we'll discuss is the actual Photoshop document format, which is called a PSD or a .psd. If you save your file as a Photoshop document, it'll say file.psd, and therefore you'll know it's a Photoshop document. The advantage of saving your documents in a PSD format is that if you have a file and you create several layers in your file, and we'll get into layers a little bit more, but basically what layers are, if you think about them of like clear acetates that you would use for an overhead projector and you put them on top of each other, that's how layers work in Photoshop. You can use different layers to create or paint or manipulate images in different layers to get effects. So if you save file formats as the native PSD or Photoshop document file format, you are able to keep all of your layers and open it up later and continue to work with it. Now the downside to it is that some programs and some instances, the document or the application that you're using your image for may not accept it. Say, for instance, if you're going to put an image up on a web page or for web use, more than likely it will not take Photoshop documents. It'll more likely take JPEGs or PNGs or something like that. Now, another note about PSD or Photoshop documents that I will note is that, let's say that you use Photoshop in conjunction with other Adobe products like Adobe InDesign, Adobe Flash, Adobe Illustrator. Using them in conjunction with those other graphic design applications, they work very seamlessly together. So for instance, let's say you were to use Photoshop documents within your InDesign application. The best part about it is that in your InDesign application, you would be able to open and edit your Photoshop document seamlessly within the other application, and then seamlessly update your image within InDesign. And that is the advantage of using Photoshop documents when you're using other Adobe products. So that said, let's go on to the other file formats that are popular and standard in photography and graphic design. Probably the most popular format, and one that everyone is familiar with, is the JPEG file format, or the .jpg format. The advantage of this format is that it's widely used across all media. You can use it in print media, you can use it on the web. It's pretty useful for photography or even video. The other advantages of it is that it compresses the file format itself takes all of the information of your file and is able to save it in a very compressed format and save it down to a small file size with getting rid of or sacrificing clarity, image clarity, only at a minimum. So say for instance I had an image, say for instance this cowboy image. This cowboy image here is indeed a JPEG. The interesting thing about it, if I were to go, and as you can see down here at the document size is 5.15 megabytes. If this were saved as some other format, say for instance a Photoshop document, the size of this document would be much larger and harder to work with, especially if trying to import it into other programs like Microsoft Word or Adobe InDesign. Now, the downside to it, what I was just saying, is that this file format compresses all of the data to make up this image, and so therefore does lose a certain amount of clarity and sacrifices that clarity for the sake of making your file size smaller. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay, so the next one we'll go on to is called different people call it different things, but basically it is a .png file, and people refer to it as a PNG or a PNG file. And the PNG file format is becoming more popular, especially on the web, because of its ability to compress file sizes much like a JPEG file, but it maintains clarity a little better and allows for a transparency to appear if you wish. So therefore, let's say you have an image and you need a part of it to be transparent so whatever background can show through, then a PNG is able to do that, as opposed to say a JPEG is not able to do that. So the next file format that we'll look at is called a .gif, or otherwise known as a GIF or a GIF, depending on how you like to say it. Most people, I think, say GIF actually, but it is a .gif. And this is another format that is mostly used on the web, and it is really a leftover from the early days of the web. It was actually one of the first file formats to be used for web development. It kind of went the wayside to JPEG for a while because of JPEG's superior ability to compress images, but recently has had a bit of a renaissance in a different application, being that the .gif file format gives you the ability to create web images that can actually be put together much like an animation, where you would have multiple images, multiple slides, and put them together in a short animated series. And these are known as animated GIFs or animated GIFs. And they are usually short and relatively small in file size and are very popular in the web these days. And I'm going to make one other note in this section, and I'm going to talk about what is known as the RAW file format. And the RAW file format is basically used in photography. And what its purpose is that in the early days of digital photography, most images were saved as JPEGs because of the ability to compress images but keep most of its clarity. Well, these days, with advances in digital technologies and digital cameras and demand from professional photographers they have come up with what they call the RAW format. And the RAW format is basically a format that is used on digital SLR cameras, and is a format that is an absolutely uncompressed, high-resolution format that takes every bit of data that has been collected for that photograph and leaves it uncompressed and unedited. So it is in truly its raw format. The advantage of that is that it gives professional photographers every bit of original data that was collected for that photograph, and gives them greater power and leeway on how to manipulate the image. Now, the downside to that, a little bit, is that it also makes for incredibly large file sizes because it's an uncompressed format, and different cameras and different applications handle RAW formats in different ways.